Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show is to provide players with a forum to ask questions about chess and the chess world. You can send these questions in advance, or if you're just tuning in live to the YouTube on ICC, you can participate in the chat, which is on the right of your screen, and ask me questions right now. I'm generally going to give priority to the questions I've received beforehand because I've been able to look at them, and also I appreciate people sending them beforehand, and I think they have some priority about being answered. And the questions you send me beforehand can be more precise with concrete positions and questions, games, whatever. So there are three ways to submit these questions in advance, anytime during the week, although it's probably best if you try and do it on the day up to the day before the show, although I'll still be checking. The first and the best way to do it is to send questions to my email address, which is askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's definitely the best. askimwatson@chessclub.com. So that's askimwatson@chessclub.com, which I'll get right away. That's the best. We also have a Twitter channel, hashtag AskIamWatson. So you can send a tweet there. Finally, you can send a message to my ICC handle, John L. Watson, which is another way to reach me. That's JOHNLWATSON. The alternative is to ask a question live right now during the show, which I mentioned, the chat line on the right. So you can ask about anything related to chess. I have some expertise in chess openings. I've taught for years. So I know chess endings, various chess strategy, leading players, chess news, chess books, chess videos, and of course I've written books for years and made videos. So you can ask about anything that comes to mind. Okay, so let's get started. Let me just see. First of all, okay, I don't see anybody on the chat yet. I want to make a few quick corrections from last week. Or even just, they're really sort of additions, or not exactly corrections, but I was talking about the Gruenfeld, and even though this wasn't the main line I was recommending, which was a bishop d2 line, the main line I was recommending was this fella here. And we went over that in some detail, but I made the comment that you could also play, as in the old days, to play an old main line, and that's really worth looking into also. So c5 really should come first, and then white playing rook b1. And I mentioned this idea of playing here, and if you took that, I'd have enough for the pawn. All I wanted to say is I don't mean doing it immediately in this position. White usually plays this first, and then he gains a tempo if the center is attacked again by playing here. And then this is a sort of a famous line that Black probably wants to avoid because White has more than enough compensation for the pawn. And of course Black does other things. For example, this move is common here. That's a very normal move. And you can grab the pawn, but you're probably better off not doing that. So that was one thing. And another thing from last week was this question about the Loewenthal Sicilian, which goes like this. And just something I forgot to mention. It's not a terrible thing, but I think it's worth mentioning that another line that White has done fairly well with is the line I used to play, which in fact is this move, with the idea going like this. I don't know if I probably mentioned it, but I thought I should mention it again because we concentrated on other moves, and I thought I'd also give Black a way to play against this, which is to play here, covering that square and allowing Black to castle. And then after that move, I think this is a good move, maybe the only good move. It's a little hard to describe that. It stops pieces from coming there, but the main point is that it prepares b5, which has a threat of b4, and also gets the bishop out. So I just wanted that for the record because some of you may want to play Black. There doesn't seem to be anything that gives a really big advantage for White, so it's kind of a fun line, especially because Black might not know anything about it. Okay. Now let me see. Oh, Queen's Gambit. Let me bring up another game here. which is this one. Here we go, 371. I'm going to bring up a game here. Talk about the, got a question about the Queen's Gambit declined with bishop f4. So the question is, basically, in the Queen's Gambit declined with bishop f4, I think you recommended 7 bishop e2, but I couldn't find many games with this line. In the past, I played 7 c5. So anyway, the line in question is, now there are various ways to get here, but the way that I'm going to show is, well, maybe I'll show this way. That's the Queen's Gambit declined. And here White plays this move, bishop f4, which is extremely popular on high levels. Now maybe it's worth mentioning why that is, that this classical line, which by the way you can get in other move orders, just playing this sort of way with here and here and here and here, this basic position, White has two things that are become sort of difficult. Now for a while I thought that Black had stopped playing this for a little while, or not playing it very much on the top levels, but right now it's looking pretty decent, this kind of position. That's called the Lasker variation, by the way, and it's good to have h6 in, by the way, in the Lasker. The other one is often called the Capablanca variation. This is holding up pretty well, so that's one reason bishop f4 might be played instead of bishop g5, and the other reason is the Tartakower still is a quite respectable opening. And that Tartakower is, the idea is to just develop and play your pieces out and play here and play normally, and there have been tens of thousands of games with this, and it's easy enough for White to get some play against this, but to actually get an advantage is difficult. And so that's why some of the top, also the theory has been pretty well worked out. So that's why people started to play this move. And notice that also often White's already committed to this move these days. If he wasn't, he could play maybe the exchange variation earlier. A lot of you know what that is. But anyway, I'm digressing a lot. Okay, so in this game, we play these normal moves, and Black plays here. That's a very popular move. There are plenty of other ways to play it. The traditional way is with c5 right away. I think White's getting some advantages against that. So this is a great game and line generally to look at, because it's a good thing to play for both sides, but in particular White I think might get interested in bishop f4. It's a fun way to play. So in this game we have let me just see here, we have bishop e2. Okay, so that's the question. The question was c5, which was played a lot over the last 5 years or so. It's been very hotly contested at the very highest levels. And at first White was doing very well, and then Black was doing quite well and equalizing fairly easily. I did see a win recently with White, so I'm not sure what the exact status is. But the point is it's been worked out incredibly thoroughly. Some games go 25 moves, just with theory in this line. And so there's nothing wrong with playing it, but people are going to be ready for it. And it's also always fun to play something a little different. So this is this strange move, bishop e2. It's not what you would expect, actually, because it allows Black to capture, and then White has to take 2 moves to recapture, and that's usually not the best sign. And in this game, Black actually played here. So let's talk about capturing for a second. The idea of capturing was made up by Lev Aronian. To play bishop e2 and allow that capture was played by Lev Aronian, and the idea is to actually just castle at this point and not necessarily commit to bishop takes c4 until you see what Black's doing. This is as opposed, let me just show you something. If you play bishop c4 immediately, Black can, for example, throw this move in with the idea of b5, bishop b7, and c5. And if White tries to stop that move, for example here, Black can go here, which, White can still play this, for example, play this move. But it's not as convincing without the knight being able to go to b5 and with Black having an outpost there. So you might say, well, why can't White blast there? That's a positionally very nice move, very common in the Queen's Gambit. It threatens to advance, and if he starts taking, you get this beautiful outpost. This is all better for White. The problem is this move attacks this and attacks this, and Black's already better. So now keep that in mind, because if we go back a little bit, to what Aronian discovered. There's this move, and now if black does decide to play something like this, and white plays here, and black plays here, white has some extra options. For example, let me just show you. Well, that might even transpose into the line that I'm playing in this game. So let me not show you that first. Let me show you what black has done in this position, which is play here. And what we find in this position is that you can simply take there. So that's sort of the background theory here. Now it turns out this position with the doubled pawns really don't hurt you. Total control over e5, possibilities of f5, open file here. This is a fun position to play. And white has done quite well in these positions. That doesn't mean black can't play this way, but it's not ideal. So often, and then you might ask, well, what about just playing normal moves again with this, the same way we played before? And the point is that white can take this, as opposed to pushing or something. And black takes, and now white takes. And it turns out this position is a little bit difficult. This bishop still hasn't gotten out. I actually had a game with this myself, and let me just show you. This is considered best, because now if black plays this move, I'm trying to give you a repertoire for white, I guess, here a little bit, you can go here. You can skip the a4 move and get a very useful move in, because this move is disastrous here, attacking the queen and attacking here. And the point is that if the queen moves, you're just going to take on e7 and play bishop d6. And if the queen takes here, you throw in the extra check. And even though you lose your piece back, black really has no good response here. You're attacking here and you're threatening just to win the rook win the exchange by knight check, for example, among other issues here. So this is just very good for white. And that was all pretty forced. So black simply can't play b5 there. Which means that white's simply better in these lines. My game went, yeah, okay. So queen takes, rook takes, a6, knight e5 with an advantage, and I could show you a little bit more here. Rook b8, no, that couldn't be. Rook e8 was played, and then I played this move with the idea of playing here, sort of a common idea in these positions, with pressure on the queen side, and somehow managed to mess up. Well, I got in a lot of time trouble. I wasn't used to this 30-minute game stuff, and that's my excuse anyway, and messed up later and actually lost this game. But right now white is much better, stands much better. Okay, let's go back to the game, which I'm going to show here, where black played, black played b6 instead. So that slow move, black decided, well, bishop e2 is slow, I'll do this. And the game went castles, bishop e7, captures, the bishop retreated, and this was pretty decent for black. Black's freeing his game and stands quite reasonably. So what I'm going to recommend, though, as an answer to the question, after b6, is simply taking right away, right here. And I think this is quite good. Okay, so first of all, if he takes this way, that's a very static pawn in the center, and if he plays there, it's going to be blocked off. So just for example, maybe a quick example here, you can play just castles, this might even be best, and then save your bishop again from knight h5, and then just put a rook over here, maybe a queen up here, rook to the center. You've got space, and that's a kind of a bad bishop. So that's an easy way to do it. Or rook c1 immediately is very interesting, maybe threatening knight b5, for example. This move is also a good move. And if, let me see, if c5 you can play here because you're attacking this twice, and if he plays here to defend it, then you have that very nice move on that square, on this square, blockading the isolated pawn. So you can see this bishop f4 stuff has a certain amount of positive pressure that you can exert. So usually black plays c5 at some point, for example here, and white takes it. Oh, I already did that. I'm sorry. That's not a very good line for black. What is a decent line for black? Oh, bishop b7 first, and then white probably plays h3 versus knight h5, just so he doesn't have to get rid of that bishop. c5 takes. If the bishop takes, you just castle and play, for example, a3 and chase that bishop away. Because if black plays a5, let's see, what was I doing? Probably this move. Because if black plays a5, he's giving up the b5 square. Even this is a very strong move. You could also play knight b5. And if you look at these positions a little, you'll see that's an isolated pawn, it's blockaded, that's a bad bishop. It's pretty easy to get used to the idea how good this is for white. It's a considerable advantage. Not what I would call, not a plus over minus, but a very strong plus equals. So b takes c5 is always better with the hanging pawns. And this is a very instructive position. This is the kind of position you're going to get a lot in this variation, if black plays well. And I just have one sample here, which is just to play this move now, because it clears the way for bishop f3, for example. And usually black's going to take that, but now what? Maybe this move, because it turns out that taking and taking here isn't that good, because black can take. But you can just play here. And then another thematic idea, how to break up the hanging pawns. These are hanging pawns. And that's always an issue, because black's about to just centralize, might even be threatening here. And it just turns out that white has timed everything correctly, otherwise he might not have played this way, to play this nice little move. The point being that if black takes, you have here, and then knight c7. So winning some material, and sort of breaking up black's pawn structure just as a bonus. So black would probably play here, and then white has a bunch of different ways to play this. Well, actually, taking here is good. That's just a trade of material to start with, but white has various ways to play this. I think a really good way to play this is just come back. Still isolated. The threat of rook b1 idea is in the 7th rank. Knight b5 is a good move. And black has some problems here. I think this should be played, attacking here. But then white goes here. And all kinds of endings are always really nice here. You can pretty much force that ending. And just for example, knight b5 is coming. And this is just a bad bishop. Something like this. You could even take this. I don't even know what the best way to do this is. Knight b5 maybe. a6. Then take. Because you're going to get the 7th rank and an overwhelming kind of position because of those forks. Well, in fact, you're winning big material, because if the rook comes over to defend, you're winning a whole piece, because that's checkmate. Even if you weren't, though, you'd have a huge positional advantage. And what else? Here, if you just take that back, then again, white gets the c file and can put a rook on c7. And you can go back and look at the video again and check this all out. It's a great question, though. I think this is very instructive kind of positions, how to play positionally in the Queen's Gambit. And bishop f4 is a nice way to do it, because people don't have it all memorized and haven't played it their whole lives, haven't played against it their whole lives. Okay, so the game, maybe I should go back to the game, which was, well, it's further up than that, isn't it? The game went like this. Oh, no, this is what I'm recommending. So knight takes is a better move. We just looked at pawn takes. And as usual, knight takes is a better move. But luckily this time after knight takes, you can take that, and black has some of the same positional issues. And I'm getting stuck here on my game for some reason. So I'll just show you. The idea is to take, and once again, this is kind of stuck. Black's going to have to play c5, and you're going to get those hanging pawns again. For example, here. And just take that. And if the knight takes, well, the knight has to take because you're on here. And look, you've got that outpost square. So this is ideal. Just a real quick line. White's clearly better here. A problem, that's not a very good piece. That's a nice idea. Now you can just block that off. You know, what happens if black plays just a simple move like this, is that you can just go here. Now you even have moves like bishop g4, b4 is an idea. You've got ideas of knight b5, and you can just chase that back. And then play, for example, knight c6, or knight takes e6. This is quite a, oh, and you win a pawn, for example. Very simple. There's other ways to play this. They're all very strong for white. We're getting to the point where it's pretty much a winning position. So instead of that, black should try to play, Well, let me see. I don't even like bishop b7. I think it's just a bad move. So what else can black do here? Probably bishop f6. Yeah, that's what I was going to show you. And now there are various ways to play this, but I was thinking just here, you could play knight d4. And that's a nice move, centralizing and attacking that bishop. But then the bishop just swings here, which is a pretty normal idea because it strengthens control of that square. And this is quite easy to play. You bring both rooks into the center, and that's weak, and you have an advantage, even when black's played pretty well here. All right, so that's a long answer. Let's see what we're doing on the chat here. Let's go all the way back. What are you recommending is the Blumenfeld Gambit. And we have, what do you recommend against the London system? Yeah, I've gotten a lot of these questions through the Blumenfeld. Could show that. I think I'll continue with some of the questions I got, since actually it's some of the same people asking. I also have this bishop f4. Some things from last week about that modern defense will be interesting. Let me just continue with this though first and see what kind of order I thought was good. Yeah, you know, in the modern defense, I promised to give more details last week. And I was going to show a game with Karyakin, since he just became, we had a very exciting week. Karyakin qualified for the World Championship against Magnus Carlsen with really an incredible game under pressure, a beautiful attacking game. That it's so funny these days. You watch these things and you watch the commentators and they've got their computers going and they're all sort of know-it-alls, and they can show a game that's just stunning and that will go down in chess history, and they'll pretty much act like it's routine and that maybe the sides made tiny technical mistakes. And really, it's just amazing what Karyakin did. And I almost thought about just showing you the game, but since you've probably seen it already and there are plenty of people online lecturing about it, I thought it'd be better to give something else. But anyway, this is a Karyakin game in the modern defense. And I'll get back to maybe the Blumenfeld Gambit in the London if I have time. I'll try to answer some things on the chat. All right, so this is a cute game that is in honor of Karyakin. Here's that modern defense. And I thought I should show you some real details about this. Now, I was asked about playing the modern defense from the white side, but also from the black side this week. And I think it's okay to play from the black side. I think that it's, let me just see. I think it's fine, but maybe if you aren't at least a master, you may not learn much about chess from it, because it's only, you don't get that many typical chess structures that come up in other openings also. It also is very frustrating to play without space. So if you kind of like it anyway, you need to study it pretty seriously, because you can kind of get blown away because you have no space. And so I wouldn't really recommend it most of the time, but if it kind of appeals to you and you enjoy it, well, what the heck, play what you feel like. Now, I'm going to show you this again because I didn't really go into the right kind of detail. One thing that I didn't show you is this, which is the old line. And I thought I'd real quickly show you sort of a main line there, which goes like this. And then black pins this, bishops before knights, to get pressure here. White defends that square. Black plays here. Now the pawn's pinned. And he's attacking here. And he's threatening maybe to take in some cases, and maybe even play here to exploit the pin. So white just simply gives up the b pawn, because if black takes it, it's just fantastic for white because he gets a 7th rank rook with a huge lead in development. But black's idea now is to double these pawns and then just develop. White castles because he wants to attack. Black plays here. He wants to play b5, b4, and knight b6 and get an attack. And white plays, what do I have white playing in this case? Have I lost? Oh, here. Just to cover that a pawn for one thing. And then after b5, playing this nice move f5. It's funny, white has a real attack just by going like this, and black's queenside attack turns out not to be that impressive. This move looks very strong. It looks like white really can't just ignore that, but he does. He just plays like that. The idea is just to blast away on the king side. The reason it looks like he can't do that is because now black, and that was the only square you'll notice, all the other squares were cut off for the knight, is that black can play there and get rid of the fantastic bishop. But now it just turns out white has extra space, black's attack is completely gone, and white's going to play h5 anyway, maybe even h6. and maybe just blast away. And the bishop has a nice square here, the knight has a beautiful square here, or it can swing the other way. And it just turns out that this position is very easy for white to play, and better for white. So it's, and I don't think there's much else to show here. You might want to try and stop h5. h5 is a big threat, but now he just reinforces the idea. And now the bishop can go either way. It could go towards this side of the board or towards this side of the board. So you'll have to slow that down, look at it again on YouTube. You'll see a copy of this broadcast and check out some lines, but this is known to be better for white, and actually is. Now that's a lot of moves, but this is a very theoretical line, this f4, and shows how in the modern you need to learn a lot of lines. You're not going to want to play this way, but you're going to have to play some other way, and in order to avoid this particular set of theory. But you can see there's a lot of theory involved. Now that's kind of old. Black maybe isn't playing that so much more. As I said last week, what he's playing instead is this a6 move. Oh, and by the way, black could, if you want to, against f4 you could go back into a Peert's defense, which requires a ton of study, but is still a pretty sound and fun thing to play. So that's the other option. Most modern defense players are going to want to play something else, and as I said last week, the most popular line is this Tiger's Modern against Tiger Hillard Pearson, who's black in this game. So this is Karyakin versus the main player who plays this line, has played just hundreds of games and wrote the book that I strongly recommend if you're a modern player. Okay, now we talked about this last week. Black just attacks, wants to play bishop b7. And if he plays bishop b7 immediately, well, there's a couple things white can do. He can just castle and then play e5, but he can also play this for a small advantage. This is a nice way to play, I think, right here, because now this pawn's a little exposed, and white also is able to just control his center better. Just for example, well, if this move, there's kind of this problem. That's a little awkward, and in fact, it turns out to be quite awkward. So you might want to play something like this. But then you run into, now you can just play there and white has the better center with a small advantage. Or takes is also a good move, just capturing. And for example, castling. Black's got to get castled, got to get the pieces out. And then black can play different ways. And then just f5 already is a good move, freeing this bishop for the attack. And I don't know if I'll do much detail there. Let me show, oh, we've already used quite a bit of time. So basically things like taking followed by an e6 is an idea, knight f4 is an idea, just to get rid of that defensive piece and bring the bishop out. e6 is going to be a big theme. So again, you can take a look at this. I have more moves, but that's not really worth it at this point. Okay, so that's if bishop b7, and that's why, that's why black plays knight d7, which I mentioned last week first, to play bishop b7, but also play the move c5. So here's the most direct way to attack. It's not at all necessary, but I really like it. And black is supposed to attack the center immediately, otherwise white starts moving in. And white attacks that rook, the rook has to move, and white simply castles in this game. Now if b4, you can play knight d5, but you can also play very simply with that, thinking about playing just c3. And that definitely favors white, although it's not a huge advantage. So what black has done in the past in this position is simply take, and then after takes, play here, giving up the exchange. Now you may be used to the fact that exchanges are given up almost routinely these days. But let me just see this. Yeah, check here, and then really the rook doesn't have anywhere good to go, because if this, then you just start taking things, and you get a super game. You attack the queen can't take that bishop because of mate down here, so you're getting tremendous development. Guess he has to go there, doesn't he? And then just bishop here. And if you look at that for a while, you'll just see how awful that is. At the very least, you're going to win the exchange. So what black does is gives up the exchange. This has all been played. It's all theory. There's a lot of theory associated with these modern defense lines, unfortunately. And white goes ahead and takes it, and takes. And then Karyakin played a new move. That stops knight h5, getting rid of the bishop, which would have been very good to unpin that. And black played e6. And Hillary Person, I think I'll stop there. Well, no, I'll finish that off. Hillary Person says that you should play that move. And against that, this is a good move, just attacking here. And, well, there's a lot of analysis. He wants to play. Oh, I'm sorry, is the knight still there? Yeah, he wants to play here, here. Now you've got to protect that e-pawn here. And then he says that white has to take with a pawn because if rook takes, queen takes. And it just turns out white's practically winning here. He just missed this. This is just a fantastic position. You just attack that again. It doesn't really matter where the queen goes. You can try a bunch of moves, but it turns out that this kind of position, you play this move rook c3. Actually, right after queen d4, you play rook c3. It's even better, sorry. You play this move rook c3, which threatens to take and take, or take on e7 first. And then, so he has to move that, and now you go back. Maybe he moves over here, and you can imagine how good this is. And then you just win one of your pawns back. You have two bishops and an attack. Rook c8 check is coming. This pawn is hanging. Okay, so that's the reason why I think the improvement doesn't work. In the game, we had, it's worth showing that. That's b4. In the game, we had instead that move to stop knight d5. White attacked the center, and now a4 was even better, as it turns out. a4 and then knight e4 was even better. But this is such a natural move. There's nothing wrong with it. And very quickly, you're going to have threats down the d file. Now the d6 square is weak. So black counterattacks. White's now thinking about bishop e7 moves, something on f6. And he gets a knight on that extremely powerful square. Queen d5 check and queen b3 check. And in fact, this game is pretty much over here. White pins that knight. There's bishop e7 was also good, but this is the easiest way to win. And there you go. Knight f7 check is going to follow, and then queen takes, and then there's even more threats. So a super game. Typical. You can see why Karyakin, that was 10 years ago, but he already had that aggressive, wonderful style, which hopefully will show up in the World Championship. Really great e4 player. There aren't that many great e4 players these days. All right, so that's a game that I wanted to show you to catch up to last week, for one thing, and just also show you how to play against the modern defense if you want to get really ambitious, or show you what the problems are with the modern defense if you're black and how you have to improve on things like this. It's not that hard to find another way to play that's irregular, but one that's really good is a little difficult. Okay, so let's just clear this out and see what we've got here. Hello, everybody. Yes. What do you recommend against the Blumenfeld Gambit? I actually don't know what I recommend against the Blumenfeld Gambit. Let's just take a quick look at that. We're going to play for b5. That would be if white plays knight f3 already instead of, well, could play c4 first, but then plays knight f3, for example. And you get a position like this, and we're in a regular Benoni here, but black has a chance to play that. It's very similar to the Benko, but a little more tactical and aggressive for black with fewer positional themes. And the usual way to play against this is to just accept the gambit and play here. Then black has a nice choice between here, the traditional move, and bishop b7, which maybe I think is a little bit better move. And there are so many ways to play against this that it's going to be kind of hard to recommend just one. This is if you accept the gambit. We can also look at declining the gambit with bishop g5. Let me just show you that real quickly, because that's what many top players play. White is supposed to have a small advantage by playing this move. And I think that's probably true. Black's used to playing against this. Black's Blumenfeld players are very ready for this, but nevertheless, they probably can't completely equalize. But I think accepting the gambit is also good if you know what you're doing, and it's been a long time since I've looked at this. So one idea is trying to get an early e4 in. Usually white plays sort of passively here and just gets pieces out. That might be okay, but one thing I remember from the old days is there's knight d2 and knight c3 moves. And I'm just trying to remember. I think that one of the ones I kind of liked was this move, which is very strange because it does allow d4. And I'm trying to figure out why people didn't play d4 here usually. You know, that looks fine to me. Maybe just the fact that that square is hanging, and that square could be an issue. And white's just going to break up the center. That's possible. Don't quote me on this. But I remember that the main moves are when black just develops instead. And then white has this nice move, giving back the pawn, but ruining black's pawn structure was the idea. And if black does, threatening e5, and if black does take it, then you have very simple moves like this, with a lot of pressure here, bishop here. Now black shouldn't play this way, but you can just imagine this is whoops, that's the queen going there. You can imagine that this position's probably very good for white. So this e4 move is kind of cool because it leaves all your pieces open as opposed to e3. It means this bishop can still come out somewhere after e4. And it grabs its share of the center. That's a line I remember from the old days that last time I looked still seemed to be a little better for white. Of course, black has ways of playing against it. You can also just play here. Now sometimes these positions are interesting because white can play, just for example, I'm trying to remember how I played this one time, or maybe more than once. Was playing something along the lines of getting bishop e3 and with h3 and with tempo, just to get developed really quickly, and then you still might be thinking about things like this. So that's another possibility. So the other thing is look up theory and see what you think is going on. But those are two slightly irregular ways of playing that I think are pretty interesting and good for white if he's careful about the move order. So and the same thing applies to bishop b7, which is more like the modern move, that you can still play for this move bishop h3 pretty soon. Well, here's another example. Here and if here. Now once again, I wonder if you can play that move. Because if this move, maybe that's good. I'm starting to remember some things now. And that's a decent way. You end up with a positional advantage in most lines. And if he doesn't play there and takes, then we've got that same issue, maybe even better, with knight here, threatening here, here, and pretty soon maybe even the e-pawn, or even this e-pawn in some lines. Okay, so that's a fun line against bishop b7, and bishop b7 is considered the better modern. It's considered the modern line, so maybe that's where I would recommend knight c3 as being very interesting. Maybe the other line you should play g3 or something like that. The old d5 line. I think the problem with the old d5 line also is that white's considered better in the simple main lines, the simple things. By the way, black's compensation here is he has got a lot of center pawns, which are maybe mobile, and very active pieces is the idea, aiming at the king, if the king goes kingside, which it probably will. Okay, so what else do we have here? Okay, that's another chat question. I've gotten for several weeks a question about the Albin counter gambit. Let me see if there's some simpler questions that might be interesting. Before I get to the Albin counter gambit, there's a question about, how should I play against the King's Indian attack? Are there any setups that are better than others? And I thought that was a real interesting question because it depends on move orders. Just for example, if white plays this move, which is the King's Indian attack, this is the King's Indian attack, is to play a King's Indian with white and play d3. And it depends on which first move you like for black. And there are three that I was thinking of talking about. One was c5, and another is d5, and another is just knight f6. And of course there's other ways you can play. You can play g6 yourself, and you can play b6. It's not a horrible move. But let's just look at this first. Now, c5 has one disadvantage, which is white might play into a Sicilian. Could be a disadvantage. But if you're a Sicilian player, or even if you have a Sicilian as a second weapon, this might be a good idea. Most players do not play one knight f3 with the idea of playing e4 because they're avoiding e4. They're playing most King's Indian attack players are very conservative, and they probably don't want a Sicilian. Nevertheless, if you play c5, you have to be ready for that. Much more often you'll see this. And the good thing about this system is that black can get a bind in the center pretty quickly because of the position of the knight on f3. Just for example, this position. Now notice that white can't break through with d4. And if he'd done so before, and I'll go really fast with this because it will take way too long otherwise. If he'd done so before, there's no convenient way to protect that knight, and you don't want to strengthen black's center. So you're going to have to retreat the knight to a square like this with a sort of a reversed accelerated fianchetto with the bishop here. It's probably it's quite good for black. You do have 2-to-1 center pawns, It's equal, but it's probably easier for black to play. Maybe, but I think it's easier for black to play. So usually white won't play d4. He'll continue his King's Indian attack plan. And then what I wanted to say is that there's two ways to set up your pieces here, but one very nice way is to set up an old Botvinnik system. And then put your knight here. Just for example, let's play some King's Indian attack kind of moves. This is kind of the King's Indian attack setup, is playing these moves. And often white will even play here, which I think is just a mistake here. And then black can play a move like this, threatening to set up the move bishop e6. Maybe castles first. So let's get castled. And white starts playing things like this. This is what you do in the King's Indian, but it's a little different against this Botvinnik setup. Black's already having more fun than white is. And white's rook really shouldn't be on e1. That's why I said it was a mistake, because he might want to break with f4, which means he wants his rook behind there. So in this position, black has ideas of d5, maybe queen here, followed by bishop h3 or bishop g4, and f5. Black has all the options, and white doesn't have that much to do. That's the idea. So that's one thing you can do if you want to play c5. Now, going back to the beginning here, what if you want to play d5, and then you have all kinds of extra options, as you do it with knight f6. And let me just see which ones I was going to mention, because again, there's an issue of time here. Against this, okay, he's going to play here, King's Indian attack. You can play all kinds of things. One way to play is this, very popular on a top level, is to play this move. Often with the idea of taking, but also possibly just retreating. The idea is to get this move in quickly. For example, something like this. You might play knight here, and if he takes that, if he plays there, you can play standard moves like this, this, and this, or this here, and then, for example, play knight e7 pretty soon. So just waiting with the center. Very solid, or you can just go for it and play this move, which I think is more fun and more interesting. So in return for getting the bishop pair, for white getting the bishop pair, you have a big center and a big nice mobile center. A lot of top players play this way and do perfectly well with it. Of course, white has options, but that's one way of playing it. If you play bishop g4 immediately, sometimes this can be a little irritating. Might be okay, but it's a Trompowsky reverse, and it's not quite what you want a lot of times. So that's why this c6 move. Or knight here first, and then maybe c6, and then maybe bishop g4, that kind of thing. It's very popular. A good solid way of meeting the King's Indian attack. Now there are other ways. You can even play c5. You can play a reversed position that white might play. This does allow a reverse Gruenfeld, but you can play slowly against it, and you find out that reverse Gruenfelds don't really do much better than Gruenfelds. So most likely they'll play castles. That's what a King's Indian attack guy usually plays. Now you can play here. You can also just play e6, a nice solid move. And now you can play here and just play a King's Indian reversed with the g3 system, which turns out it's hard for black to get an initiative against this. Which means that white can equalize, but white has a hard time getting more than equality. Another way of playing this is, let me see. Oh, you can even play this. Once again, now this is what white wants. He wants a King's Indian, but it turns out it's not so easy. These kinds of positions aren't so simple. I had this once as white in a sort of reversed King's Indian attack, and actually lost a game against a grandmaster. So, not from the opening, of course, but it's quite playable for black, as it turns out. A lot of openings are playable a tempo down, but that would be my last choice probably. Now another way to play this is to play the French version of the King's Indian attack here. And black can either just castle and have a normal King's Indian attack, which is actually okay these days for black. If you know what you're doing, you have to study this. Used to be white would get advantages playing all these aggressive moves, but now black can play this position. Or black can even avoid the main line by playing a move like, don't want to get this wrong, maybe, be a little careful here. What you're aiming for is b5. I don't know if you can play it right away. You might be able to, or rook b8, or maybe queen here. And delay castling. It turns out there are some nice things about delaying castling. So you might want to look into that. So there's d5, and there's other ways to play with d5. But I wanted to mention, knight f6, very flexible. Now you can just copy him and play a King's Indian yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to do something more original, then see if we have a thing here. The bishop g4 is like a Tory attack reverse, very much so. It's a Tory attack with the conservative move. It's as if you have a Tory attack with c3, which is the most common way to play the Tory, but you've already kind of committed to it. Absolutely, good comment. The Tory attack is bishop g5 for white, and it's pretty effective. And having a tempo down doesn't really hurt you. Good point. So let me see. So what was I going to show you here with this? Just trying to get some. Oh, I was also going to show you not even knight f6 on the first move, but right, just playing this way, and then playing a move like this, a sort of London system kind of move, and just this sort of thing. And if he persists with the King's Indian attack, now you got to be a little careful that he might play knight h4 at some point. Right now, I don't think it's much of a threat, but if it is, you can always play that move, and then just develop. This is a London system again, reversed. Well, no, actually, this is a London system, depending what white does exactly. If he plays this kind of thing, and you can also play this with white. So this kind of setup, it's considered completely equal. What else can you do against the King's Indian attack? I wanted to show you a few other things. Oh, knight f6 right away. What else was I thinking here? Yeah, just repeat. Oh yeah, just the thing that Fisher said years ago, and it's not maybe that important. It's not what I'd recommend playing actually, but the idea is you just copy, and then if white plays here, you play here, and if white plays here, you play here, and you decide both those positions are perfectly playable. So that's a funny little thing that Fisher pointed out once. He's kind of a famous answer he gave. All right, in the book, I recommend a system with knight c6 without c5. Yeah, but that's King's Indian. Let me show you that, and you're absolutely right. That's in some ways an easier King's Indian attack to play against. That's if white plays e4 and is already committed to e4, and black plays e6. And a lot of times people don't like playing against the French, so they'll play a King's Indian attack, which means either here, well, actually, it probably means, okay, it probably means playing this right away. And if black plays here, playing here. And then what I think the chap, Juan Arias is saying, he's talking about this position, where white's going to play like this next. And there are several ways to play against this. I think they're all good. But one way is to play this knight c6 move, which I mentioned in the book. Just play a Philidor reverse. After all, the Philidor is not exactly a terrific opening if he plays bishop here. Or just keep developing your pieces. I kind of like the move bishop d6 here. A little bit abstract, but it's kind of a nice move. And you can also play that against in this position. It's a nice, interesting move, I think. But if you want to, you can take at some point. Well, there's a bunch of ways to play this. You can also play for b6 at some point. I think in my book, I think I give this line. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look. I've actually kind of forgotten. But that's an interesting way to play. And you can always play e5 later, where the bishop's quite well placed. In other words, if white really piles up on threatening to play e5 himself, with rook e1, for example, then you might just respond with this. There's so many ways of playing these things. And early d takes e4 is also pretty good. So that's the French version of the King's Indian attack, which you don't usually get directly from here. You could get it though. You could play this right away and wait and see what white's doing. Yeah, sure, here we could get this. But you'd have to commit to some sort of system here. For example, either here or here. Now we looked at c5 before. If he played knight c6 now, I'm afraid he might just play something like d4. So that'd be a little bit, that wouldn't be a good knight c6, this particular line, or at least not great. Pretty much everything's playable, but so I hope that kind of gives some idea here. The polar system with early b5 is also good. Yeah. I played this once against Jack Peters. I won one of my first games against a strong player. Well, that's maybe not true, but against a player I really admired by playing that move. you can play it right away, especially if he plays here already. I think you're probably referring to this first and then this. A little bit safer, because then he isn't going to play here with tempo. Actually, I know what I played. I played it in an irregular position, real crazy, which is to play, let's see if I can get this right. Somehow I had e6 and b5 in, and I'm not sure exactly what order, but a very early b5. Yeah, that's definitely possible. Get a little bit more space, but absolutely unnecessary. So, yeah, I guess you could something like this might be interesting. It's a thought. All right, yeah, good question. And what else have we got here? The Blackmar Deemer. I covered that actually a couple weeks ago, and I'll cover it again, but maybe not right now is not the best time to do that. I was also asked who I thought. Let me see. Yeah, there's the question about well, what are Karyakin's chances in the match against Carlsen? Be interesting to see. You guys on the chat, you might say what you think is going to happen. I mean, Carlsen's a clear favorite. Everybody admits that. But wow, I'm out of the camera for a little while. I'll have to watch that. Well, I have a new setup as usual. It's always a new setup. I think that, oh, here we go, knight f3, knight f6, g3, b5, which is what I guessed you were probably trying to say. Yeah, b5 immediately is a little crazy, isn't it? Playable, but tough, because white can play e4. So let me see. Oh, yeah, Karyakin. I thought that would be an easy thing to get through, even with little time. I think Karyakin is one of the best players to play against Carlsen. I think I looked it up, and he has one win and maybe not even a serious classical game, and maybe 3 losses, which is already not too bad, given other people's record. Svidler has the best record, I think, and Geary is okay, also against Carlsen. But they have 18 draws. So Carlsen hasn't been able to really crack Karyakin consistently. So now I think that includes, some blitz games and some other stuff. But nevertheless, it's kind of an indication that we have a very solid player who might play Carlsen's game a little bit, because Karyakin's excellent at drawing inferior endgames, creating positions that he can draw, and yet has an aggressive side that he can turn on whenever he wants to with his e4 repertoire, for example. So he's very flexible. Obviously, what's going on, as in many matches, is if he gets intimidated by a couple of early losses, things could really fall apart, because it's his first and arguably it's possibly his only world championship if he isn't careful. So, I mean, I wouldn't put a number on it, but some of these guys against Carlsen, you almost feel like it's 80-20 or something, whereas this is more like 65-35 or something, or 60-40 or something. Karyakin definitely has a chance. And these are short matches, so, and he'll be well prepared, motivated, and he's younger, and I think it's great to be younger. I think that is well, I'm happy that there's a younger person. I think Caruana would have been fun too. But in a sense, I think Karyakin's a better match opponent against Carlsen, because he can be patient, but he can also turn things on if he needs to. And he's obviously high confidence right now, which is important, after having a little period where he didn't play quite up to his potential for a little while. Maybe he was playing a little too passively, and anyway, I just love the way Karyakin can fight back. Carlsen tends to do these tiny advantages. Those are the games he wins. And that might not be so easy against Karyakin. As easy as, somehow people fold against that pressure, and I'm not so sure Karyakin will. Anybody have any opinions on that? We can get on the chat channel here. I suspect some people will just say Carlsen will just crush him. And I'm sure that's what the internet opinion pretty much is. But it'll be interesting. Be nice if they could, maybe tie the match. I don't know if if there's some sort of playoff provision. I think there is. So, which line do you think they'll play the most? Oh, I think they're going to come up with something pretty original, because they've got 6 months to prepare. So you really can't play into your main openings. I think you have to kind of do something a little bit original, a little bit different. You won't see the same things you saw in the candidates. Karyakin will start out with something safe, I think, and then switch to e4. at a certain point. The nice thing about, I thought Anand's best, I thought that Carlsen preparing knight f6 against Anand almost backfired. White had some real interesting aggressive games there. So maybe Karyakin will start with d4 a bunch, and kind of hope for see what Carlsen's doing against d4. Because if it's the Gruenfeld, you can get some ideas against it. You can get some thoughts. I doubt if Carlsen would repeat that because it's a new match. Yeah, good point. I think people are just awfully tired of the Berlin endgame. He means this thing. Svidler made the point that in principle he will not play a Berlin endgame, and he didn't even give that much. He said his reason when he was pressed, his reason was that that everybody plays it, so somebody has to not play it. The Berlin endgame is, of course, this capture thing with I'm sorry, d4. Sorry, what am I doing here? With d4 and knight takes e4. Are we gonna? Do I need to do this? Yeah, I might as well show it. I guess it doesn't hurt. It's this idea about playing like that, and then here, and then the queens go off. What happened in the candidates was something much more interesting, which I always give to my students to play if they aren't Shoko piano players. It's very similar to the Shoko piano, it's just to play d3, and that's what happened in the candidates. And White had a lot of success, maybe not directly in the opening, but I think White's record was pretty good. Caruana is fantastic at playing this way, so is Anand. You know, well, these little ideas of playing here in c3 and playing it kind of like a Ruy Lopez with d3 and then playing d4 later. Carlsen is fantastic as White. On the other hand, the great 1e4, e5 players are still happy with getting this because White's given up his most obvious way of trying to get the advantage, which is blasting through like this. And because he's already made that extra move d3. So Black's gotten his pieces out in a classical fashion here. And White does various things here. White can castle immediately or play this move first, or and there was even a game with bishop g5. That is an idea. And White can play. White tends to play back here and play these kinds of things. There was also a game, I think Karyakin himself was White, where he played bishop takes c6, an early bishop c6. So there's all kinds of ways to play this stuff. But yeah, I think you would see this if there was e4, e5 games because it's so hard to avoid. So I think you might see this exact thing. That's a good point. You might see this position. It's also possible he'll play the Shoko piano version of it, although it doesn't seem to be that popular, but it's the same idea, this setup. My students play that a lot. So, good question, and we're approaching a time limit here. The Albin counter gambit is way too complicated to answer that question. Let's see, is there anything easy? I think a very good question is about the end game between the Svidler and Caruana end game, which was rook and bishop versus rook. I'd love to go over that next time. I think that's great fun. The question is, how do you win that? How do you win that ending? And I think it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek because it's really a draw if the side with the rook plays perfectly. But I don't know if there's time enough to set that up. I think I'll have to wait on that. So unless I have any more questions on the chat, I think I'll leave these questions for next time. There is the London system question. I could start that. Might be okay. Just one of many ways to play against the London system when you play the king. So even if White could win a pawn, he'd have way terrible development, and Black's bishop would be free. So White's going to not allow that. White's going to play castles probably. Now, this system I think is very interesting, just preparing e5. It has been pretty successful. And White can play things like this and maybe even try to keep that bishop under control. And then Black sometimes plays like this, and even g5 sometimes is played to attack. It's been played quite a few times actually. It's a nice aggressive way of playing. So I think I'll mention at least that. If you play the king, so the question is, if you play the king's Indian, which you all probably know is this, and White plays the London, which is basically that, then what's a good system? And there are plenty of other ways to play. The c5 is still quite respectable. Problem with c5, I think a lot of people think it's a little too, maybe even a little bit passive. For one thing, white has one option of playing the ending, which gives him probably nothing, but but also black has a hard time scaring anything up in that kind of ending. So yeah, now an interesting move now after knight d2. Let me see, do I have an extra move? Oh, maybe h3 isn't always in here. So if it's black's move now, queen b6 is always interesting, attacking this. And then trying to get white to play something like this, defending it, and then black goes ahead and plays for rook c8 and c takes d4 and knight b4, that kind of stuff. So that's another way of playing. That's kind of very safe. I used to play this as black. The only problem is a lot of times you don't get much from it. Maybe white should have played knight d2 by now already to meet queen b6 with knight c4. So then black sometimes plays here, planning to take that off, take off that knight. And that's a pretty good line for black. So what white often does is try to chase the bishop away so that he can still get knight c4 in. And this is very messy, but black's considered fine. Black's considered okay. So that's two ways you can play against the London system if you're black playing the King's Indian. And of course there's plenty of other ways too. But I think in general the London system tends to work better and get more interesting play against the King's Indian than it does against d5 systems and some other lines. I think this is a fun system to play for white. Even though it looks like I just showed you two decent ways to play, neither one of them gives you an advantage for black, obviously, and it's not even really equalized. It's just a fun way to play for black. So white, if he plays carefully, can get perfectly good play against both those things I just showed you. So I think in general this is a fun thing. One of the big points of the system is that if black plays for e5, white has this nice idea about playing c4. And then if you get this sort of standard looking idea here, maybe this kind of thing, then white can even play for the move c5. It's nice space. The point is that black's usual ideas of advancing there open up this bishop. So that's a good reason to play the London system for white, is that if black's a little too stereotyped, then he can run into trouble or have a position that's really not very desirable. Okay, I think we've gone about the amount of time that we would like to here. And so please keep the questions coming. You'll notice I have plenty of them coming by email. That's the best way to send them. Email is really a lot easier, but messaging John L. Watson on ICC, that's with an L in the middle, John L. Watson, is also fine. And I'm getting plenty of those. I'd like more. It's good to get more, but it'd be also nice to get more by the chat. Like the one I just got, but it's a little bit late because we're closing up. Starting out learning chess, do you think it's smart to continue play when down pieces? Well, it depends who you're playing. If you're playing another person who's just starting out, who's a beginner, I think it's excellent. Yeah, you definitely should play on because it's good practice. Yeah, you should definitely play on. Now, you don't play to mate necessarily. If you're a total beginner, I guess you can play to mate, but very soon you should learn how to resign just because it's part of the game. And it's sportsmanlike. But early on, when you're just starting out, you can almost play all the way to mate. You should certainly keep playing against lower players. If you're playing a high player who's obviously way above you and has played for many, many years, then it's a polite thing to resign. You can always play another game. Just keep playing. Get a lot of practice. No Berlin endgames. Yeah, very helpful. Oh, thank you. Yes. As a King's Indian. So thanks. I'm glad I can be of some use here. Send me your questions for things you're confused about or things you need help on, and you can check out my earlier lectures on openings, for example, and ask about things like that. I've had questions about the middle game, and I have another one about visualization that I hope to get to. What else? Well, there's a whole bunch of them. So ask general questions about trending and that kind of thing is absolutely fine. Or as I say, chess history is fun. You know, we can have one of those things where everybody starts talking about who they think the best players are and get in a little bit of an argument. Greatest players of history, that kind of thing. All right. Thank you, everybody, and hopefully I'll see you next week.